If it pleases the court, Your Honour, my name is Ryan, initial A, and I will appear on behalf of the defendant, Mr. G. Featherstone. Pursuant to Section 398(1) of the Queensland Criminal Code, the maximum penalty for the crime of stealing is imprisonment for 5 years. However, as the offender stole from his employer and the items stolen are worth more than $5,000, the maximum penalty is imprisonment for 10 years. It is my submission today, Your Honour, that we are not dealing with a serious criminal offender. The defendant is a young adult and the circumstances of his offence are nowhere near the most severe for this offence. In fact, it is submitted to the court today that the suitable penalty for the offender's crime is a non-custodial sentence in the form of a community service order. This is due to a variety of mitigating factors, including the defendant's early guilty plea, his remorse for his actions, his medical conditions, his young age, his prospects of future employment, and prospects of rehabilitation. In asserting this, Your Honour, we are not contesting that this is a serious offence. In fact, as demonstrated in the Crown v. Bryant, stealing by an employee from their employer is seen as a serious offence because it involves a breach of fidelity and the use or abuse in defrauding the employer of opportunities and information which the employment affords. Therefore, this case has classified the offence as a serious offence. In saying that, Your Honour, it must be considered that the defendant entered into an early guilty plea in his original sentence. In fact, the offender informed the police of his intention to plead guilty at the earliest opportunity. He was not trying to defraud police or hide what he had done. In fact, he didn't even realise that what he was doing was stealing, which I will touch on a little bit later. In fact, the case of R.V. Thomas supports the notion that leniency is afforded to encourage early pleas of guilty so that the criminal list is more expeditiously disposed of, and so that other cases in which there is a more genuine issue to be determined will be brought on for hearing without delay. Therefore, specific regard must be had to the early guilty plea that the defendant entered into for the original sentence of stealing. Following on from this, the defendant has expressed deep remorse for the original act of stealing and has since shown great remorse for breaching the community service order. In fact, the defendant is quite upset that his nature to be sociable and drinking heavily, which I'll touch on next with his medical conditions, has affected his ability to complete his community service order. This remorse was also demonstrated through his early guilty plea, as demonstrated in the case of Sargento and the Queen. Now touching on to his medical conditions. It is clear that the offender suffers from chronic depression. In fact, the offender has an email from his general practitioner which states that Mr. Featherstone is a borderline alcoholic, but he has yet to receive any treatment other than some counselling for that condition. He also suffers from the chronic depression, which he's prescribed SSRI to be taken daily. However, he's often non-compliant with that medication. It can be said that the heavy drinking and socializing are an outlet that many young people use as an outlet to manage their depression. This does not excuse the behaviour of the defendant and Mr. Featherstone, but it explains what led him to breaking his community service order and the factors that stepped into that place. Mr. Featherstone is not trying to avoid responsibility. In fact, he's very keen to serve out his community service order as he understands that what he's done was wrong. However, his condition and impaired decision-making have prevented him from complying with his community service order. As heard in the Queen against Verdens, imposing a custodial sentence will only serve to worsen these conditions. In fact, it is presented that Mr. Featherstone instead needs to receive counselling for his depression and start taking his medication daily to try and compensate rather than using drinking and socialising as an outlet. With all these things considered, it must then be decided that the offender's age can be considered to be a mitigating factor, as Mr. Featherstone has just reached adulthood at the age of 20. This argues that his relative youth should act as a mitigating factor. In fact, his immaturity and young age was demonstrated, as he technically didn't think that what he was doing was stealing. He didn't intend to keep any of the radio parts. He in fact wanted to return them afterwards. He has a podcast in which he just wanted to trial the radio parts, review them, and return them. This demonstrates his level of immaturity, as he doesn't quite understand that what he was doing could affect someone else's business. Missing his community service order because of his drinking and alcohol also demonstrates further his immaturity. He's a 20-year-old adult that can't seem to align his futures. However, despite all of this, since the offense, the offender has been in steady employment with an auto parts retailer. The owner has provided him with a reference which supports his support in continuing his employment if given a non-custodial sentence. A custodial sentence will prevent the offender from maintaining his current employment, as shown in the analogous case of Ryan v. Queen. Next, the defendant here has high possibility of rehabilitation. The offender is terrified of being given a custodial sentence, especially at his young age. He never thought that his stealing would come to this point. The threat of jail time alone has allowed the severity of the situation to be understood clearly by the offender and strongly encourage compliance and rehabilitation. The offender's young age and future job employment also favors high prospects of rehabilitation. This was demonstrated in the case of DPP against Snell. It should also be understood that at the original sentencing hearing, the defendant did not understand the original sentence due to having a migraine at the time of the sentence. Now referring to Section 92AI of the Penalties and Sentences Act, it's known that prison should only be used as a last resort. In his past, Mr. Featherstone only has minor stealing and driving offences, in which the latest of which was punished with a wholly suspended sentence of 6 months imprisonment. This was completed successfully. Therefore, he should only receive a non-custodial sentence for this offence.